Hi, Peter.
Hi.
Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks for having me, Dalia.
Sure. And to introduce you a little bit, can you tell me a bit about yourself, including like what you do now and where you was born, like what?
Sure. I'll try to be brief.
Okay.
What I'm doing now is, and we're going to talk about this, is I'm working in Ukraine. I've been there virtually since the war started, and helped create an NGO that's been involved in helping displaced people and people challenged at the front and so forth. But before that, I grew up in the Middle East. My parents, my father was a doctor, my mother was a nurse. My father was a doctor in infectious disease and tropical medicine. And so I grew up in the Arabian Peninsula. They were involved in basically bringing Western medicine to the Middle East and helping organize the medical society, if you will, across the Middle East, from North Africa all the way out to Iran and across. And I came to the States as a teenager during the Vietnam War, during civil rights, during all the upheaval of the 60s, and went to school in the Bay Area in California, and then went on to university, and then made my way back again to the Middle East, where I worked again, because it still felt like I was trying to figure out where do I belong in the world. Worked there for a while, and then came back to the States, and ultimately ended up in Seattle after going to graduate school back east to the business school at University of Pennsylvania at Wharton, and got involved in the software industry out here from the late 80s when the desktop computer arrived and things really got started, and originally helped build a company called Aldus that became Adobe, and then became an entrepreneur on my own and started a number of companies. And in the last half dozen years, I've been involved in various nonprofit organizations. I have 2 kids, one's still in college, one's graduated, and my wife and I live just a mile south of where we're sitting right now in Seattle, which is where I've lived for the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah, and that was so fortunate. That's how basically I met you, because you are my neighbor.
Yeah.
That's so cool. And yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction. But yeah, like we are here today to talk about your work in Ukraine, right, during the war. And tell me a little bit about like how you decided to go there. And as far as I remember, you told me that you came to Romania first.
Yeah. So in February, when the war started, I had been following what was going on leading up to it. To me, it was really clear the war was about to start, and I really believed it was the first time in my life that I could see a war that I believed in, that I could support. So all the other wars I had experienced as a young child and an adult, I all thought were just completely, unnecessary, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what Ukraine was about to suffer, and then when the war started, I really couldn't shake it. But then I was trying to figure out how do I get over there, and I really, really wanted to be involved at the ground level. I really wanted to understand what the needs were at the ground level, and being a former entrepreneur, I think that was a good part of sort of the life I had led before, which is get to know your customer, right? So I didn't want to write a check. I didn't want to be working with some large NGO. I wanted to see it firsthand and then figure out how to support it. So I got on Telegram and was looking across what was going on in Ukraine, and there were lots of little NGOs, just some that already existed that were dealing with maybe homeless before and now had redirected themselves to dealing with displaced people helping soldiers and so forth. And there was one hospitalers who were involved in providing paramedical support to the front lines, and that was first who I was going to approach because I'd been a fireman and paramedic when I was young. Mm-hmm. So I was going to try and do that, and ultimately they no longer needed them by the time I could leave. And so I just left. I left to Romania. I had spoken with someone on the phone who was Romanian, who said there are a lot of people in the Romanian-Ukrainian border that could use help. Just go, it'll work. And that was all I needed. That's all I needed to hear. So I flew to Bucharest, took the train up to Suceava, and I met, I didn't actually end up meeting the person I was planned to meet. I met someone else whose name happens to be Peter as well. And I thought, oh, that's fortuitous. and we created an NGO. That's how it started. So that's how I ended up there. And then it took many different dimensions as the war evolved.
Wow. And I remember this story that you just accidentally met the person in the railway station, right?
Completely accident. I had my bag in my hand, and this guy ran up to me, and he was excited and looked really friendly, and he spoke a little English. And so I said, I'm supposed to meet so-and-so. He goes, oh, I know him, but no, you're here to work, right? Yeah. Come work with me. And I went, okay, I'll come work with you. And that's how our partnership started.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then tell me about those early days. Like, what was he doing? Like, how did you help him?
So, if you remember the early days, it was winter, and there were this tremendous flood. Ultimately, 7-8 million people, maybe more, that were refugees. So these are people that were fleeing the country with whatever they could carry. And they were lined up for miles at the border because the border wasn't equipped to handle that volume, right? So they had their bags literally in lines in the snow for as long as you could see, and waiting to have their passports stamped and pass through. And so initially, Peter and his family had gone down the very first day. Peter got off work, they went down in their van and they brought what they had. They bought lots of bottles of water and blankets and whatever they could gather. And that started growing. He was reaching out to his neighborhood, then he reached out to the entire town, and that grew where he was starting to get large donations. So that started before I arrived. By the time I got there, which was a couple months later, Peter had relocated, like 5,000 people had been involved in.
Wow.
So they would stay in his basement because his basement was large enough to put bedding and so forth. And then they were working with other organizations to find them locations somewhere else in Europe or in Romania, right? So they were helping them find more permanent housing. And then someone at the border mentioned that there were all these displaced people that were not refugees, that were still in Ukraine, but they were displaced from areas of hostility, basically homeless, right?
Yeah.
And there were another 7 or 8 million of those people. In Chernivtsi, where the city that's just north of us in Ukraine, it has a population of 250,000 people ordinarily, and they had 110,000 IDP.
Wow. So
1/3 of the population were homeless. And so that's when I came, and we decided to set up a kitchen, the Oblast Administrative Building, which is, an oblast is like a province or a state, if you will, within Ukraine. I think there are 17 of them, 16. And we met with the governor of the oblast, his staff, and negotiated to be able to put a kitchen into the central square in the middle of their administrative building, which was sort of shaped like a C, and then it had this open area in the courtyard. And we put in a kitchen, and we fed 1,000 to 2,000 people a day. And largely it was governed, the numbers were governed by how much money we could raise and how much food we could get to feed them. Our staff, this wonderful couple who are my second family, they're from Donetsk. They'd been IDP twice when the Crimean War started. Then they went back, rebuilt their homes, and then they lost their homes again in 2022. And so they worked as this team in the kitchen, and we did that. We did that work initially. So that's sort of how it started. Over time, because we were kind of the community center, for that region, for that oblast, that city. So we had reach to all the other people that might be connected to the people that were coming to our kitchen, because a lot of people couldn't get there. They didn't have transportation. They didn't have any way of getting to the kitchen. But we knew, we through our network, we knew who they were. And most of these people knew each other, because so many people came from Donetsk initially, Donbass, right? So they all sort of knew each other. It was like just a village had been moved, right, to a new location. And when they left together, right? Let's all go to Chernivtsi, or let's all go wherever, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. And so that kind of network existed. So we did summer camps for kids. We did holiday celebrations. We had arts contests in the city. We did all kinds of, we had a team from Italy of pediatric physicians who stayed for weeks to be there long enough to actually have an impact, seeing kids more than once, right? Working with their parents in order to teach them about whatever ailed their child so that they would have a good outcome. We did behavioral health group meetings with women that had been through horrible trauma that had their kids. So we were constantly trying to find things that could help that community, and then try to find the support, financial support to meet that need. So that's we were always doing that. We had the benefit of being small, so we could adapt. We're constantly like, what's going on now? What's changed? What do we do to help? And our goal was to help these people become independent. So we also were trying to find them jobs, trying to find them more permanent, places to live and so forth. So that's how it started.
Right, I see. And I remember you were telling me that you look for people who are already doing something, right? And look for the ways to help them, look for the ways that,
Absolutely.
what they need, etc. Tell a little bit about, those people that you work with,
Sure.
What they do.
Sure. Well, so one example is a woman. When the war started, if you recall, Bucha and Irpin were just atrocities, right? And lots of there were a lot of orphans that came from there, parents that got killed in the first days, right?
Yeah.
And the Ukrainian government wanted to move the orphans away from where they thought there was that continued threat of violence. And they had a program, they still have it, a retired general runs it, where he would basically take the staff and the children, so what was necessary to support them, and then find a place to relocate them. So there was kids from Bucha, Irpin, that were relocated to Chernivtsi, and a woman was going to head that orphanage up, and it was also a pediatric hospital combined. So the woman who ran the hospital said, okay, we'll add the orphans to it, and they now have this orphanage there for kids only up to, I think, 8 years old. Then they have to go into the foster care system. So these are little kids. So I met her. We decided we're going to help her. It was back, at that time was when we first had power outages, and they had a hospital and an orphanage. They definitely need power. And so we got them help mobilize support for generators so that they had offline power. So those are we were doing things like that everywhere. And then ultimately, I think I shared with you the work that we did out in Toretsk, would you like me to describe that now?
Sure. And so Toretsk was very close to the front line of the war, right?
Yeah. So
when did you get there? And what did you do there?
Well, in 2022, tail end of that year in the fall, was when the Ukrainians had the offensive that started in the Kharkiv area. They liberated all that surrounding Kharkiv, and then they headed south to Izum. So they headed down kind of towards Slovyansk, that part of Luhansk area. And so I should step back. One of the main way in which we find opportunities to help is through the networks that we have. And the networks are largely faith-based. So it's all the pastors in the significant cities and towns. They know all the pastors down in the smaller villages, and they have a network that communicates and says, we need help here, we need help there, right? And things change. I mean, you remember when the dam broke, in Kherson, when the dam broke and flooded, immediately we knew where there were problems and where they needed help, right? So we could respond. It's like our nervous system, right? So Ilya in Ilusha in Kharkiv, who is the top pastor in this one faith-based group, I met with him at this meeting we would have about every couple months where we'd all get together and talk. And he said, please come out and help. And this was when the army was liberating villages. So I went out and did that. And we brought aid to help with that. And that was largely the traditional bringing your first bags of food, right? It was just people that had just been liberated. So they were in the days, everything around was destroyed. So it was just that first moment of freedom, right, from the Russians. And then in conversation with him, he said, because he knew we had this kitchen, and we wanted to expand. And we were talking about putting one in Kharkiv. He said, no. He said, we don't need that in Kharkiv. And he explained why. He said, but where they need help like that is down in Toretsk. He said, there's, in the Donetsk area, he said, there are these villages that are right up against the border that nobody's helping, that are being, every so often are being bombed. They're living without power, without, just kind of at the edge. And he said, can you go down? I said, okay, I'll go down. And so I went back to our base in Romania, and then I went out to Toretsk. And Toretsk is between Bakhmut and Avdiivka, the two main cities that were destroyed in the last 6 months. It's right between the two of them. And the border there had been holding since the war started. And so I went out and I met this one couple and then this group of women, two different groups. And they had been using their pots and pans from their homes and, small spoons, and cooking meals for hundreds of people every day. They would get up literally like 1 a.m. And cook enough food so that by 1 o'clock they could serve a meal to people. And in Toretsk, I think the population ordinarily is like 40 or 50,000, and there were like maybe 10 still there, because you could still survive, right?
Yeah.
And, as we've talked, people had, ducks, chickens, a plot of land behind where they could grow things. They had everything they needed. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have water, but we, ultimately we solved for that. But so they were living in a challenging time, but, periodically, the Russians would bomb us, rockets, various types of things would end up coming into Toretsk, but it wasn't often enough. You get used to it. In war, you get used to it, right? You can hear in the background, you can hear the shelling because just over the hill is the war. Over the hill was the most severe fighting in the war, but it wasn't in Toretsk, right? And so I talked with them. I said, what do you need? And they were very cautious they didn't want to overwhelm me, so they would tell me, and okay, well, we can do better than that. And Irina, the woman who was the older woman in the group of women, they all had I'll get to that eventually, but they called her the babushka. She was the grandmother, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, she says, big spoons, because she holds up this little metal spoon and says, I need big spoons. Okay, I got that on my list, big spoons. And so I drove back to Chernivtsi, which has a huge bazaar, like the old world, like, when I grew up in the Middle East, it's like what we call a souk, right? It covers blocks and blocks. It's enormous. And there's no map and there's no numbering system, and it's hard to find what you're looking for. So I had my friend Igor pushing a handcart, and we wandered through that. I had my watch on. I was tracking how far. We walked 6 miles, going back and forth in the bazaar. And do you have 100-liter stainless steel pots? Oh, let me see. They go up into the attic. They come down. Will this work? It's not stainless steel. No, that won't work. So it's you can imagine thousands and thousands of plates, thousands of forks and knives. All because these are consumables, right? Things that people could take food home and so forth. So everything you can think of: gas stoves, gas refrigerators, everything. And then I put it in. We have a Sprinter van, right? So I filled it up with all the equipment, and I drove back. And it was like being their fairy godmother. It was, because I hardly knew them, right? But I came back and they had everything they needed. All of a sudden they had 2 full kitchens of equipment, big spoons, big wooden spoons, everything. And we also had, we had a couple tons of food too, produce and butter, eggs, milk, and so forth. So we got it started with that. And then with time, especially with the change in seasons in the winter, we were bringing, thermal underwear. I brought hundreds and hundreds of, pairs of thermal underwear. We put in 80 stoves because nobody had power. And so a lot of people had no heat. And so I had the stoves made by my partner in Ilusha in Kharkiv. He had them built by a iron mason, and they cost us. I think it cost us $80 a stove or $100 a stove. So we had 80 stoves with stovepipes, and then we brought those to Kharkiv and to Toretsk and installed them. And people went from literally, when I was there, when we installed them a year ago, the interior temperature of people's homes was below zero. And they were wearing all their clothes, right? And they would come to our kitchens, because eventually we had Starlink stations in our kitchens and generators and big water tanks with potable water and everything they needed. So they would come, again, just like in Chernivtsi, this became the community center, right?
Yeah.
People would come, charge their phones, connect on the internet with their family elsewhere in the world, and get water. But in the winter, they'd bring the water home to be frozen by the time they woke up in the morning. So they would have to go get more water, right? Because there was nothing to warm it, right? And some of these homes, you walk in and it was, and they couldn't shower. I mean, it was pretty grim. And we put the stoves in, and all of a sudden there was light, there was warmth. And the biggest thing was they could be hospitable. They could actually offer me a cup of coffee. Like they got to know me, and I'm sure they felt like, geez, this person is doing things for me. I want to do something for them, right? And so, we came back, and I just remember some of these apartments that, no light, they'll glow at night. The only thing glowing was that stove. And because of the artillery, because of the destruction in the city, the trees had all been blown up, right? So there was lots of wood around, right? So they're always, you can see people with their bicycles loaded up with like a big tree trunk that they're dragging home, right? And then they chop it up and use it for wood. So there's an abundance of wood. So once the stoves were in, and from that you're solving for a problem that you can define, because you go there and you go, okay, this is what will work in terms of the circumstances. So and that we added another kitchen, so we had 3 here all up until June of this year, and we kept, again, listening. What do you need? And bringing what they needed. Some people would argue. There are sometimes some of my friends, Ukrainian friends out there, would say, you're just keeping them there because you're helping them, right? They're staying. And I would say, well, where are they going to go? And this was always the conversation: was you're torn between, by providing support, you're enabling them to continue to stay in a place that's becoming more dangerous, right? But some people had left Toretsk and came back because they couldn't survive elsewhere in Ukraine, because they didn't have any savings. They couldn't farm. They didn't have ducks and chickens, so they were suddenly having to live off the economy, and they had no jobs. And so those people would return and say, I'd rather have this where I feel at least I have control over my life than trying to make it somewhere else. And a lot of them are old. And we had probably over 10% were disabled. So they were living in basements. And someone like a family member or a friend was helping to look after them. So those were meals that they would carry home from our kitchen to those people. Yeah,
disabled, and also those old people. You said the retirement pays,
the pensions they had,
like $100, right?
Oh, it's like $100.
And then their garden, their chickens, their sheep is the only way to survive.
It is. Yeah, it's really mostly what they survive on is the pension's just enough to cover the other things you can't grow. They live really, really simple lives. And they don't have access to healthcare. I watched them. I've had 2 hip surgeries myself, and I watch some of these old people walk in. I go, I know you're in pain, because I know exactly what's wrong. Your hips are gone, and the men are all miners, and they look they look like they've had really hard lives. It's a hard part of Ukraine. There's those traditional mining industries and labor-intensive work. So it's a rough place, and not particularly pretty. It's a landscape that's just the steppes are just flat and kind of barren.
All right. And you said they don't have any healthcare, so they don't have any doctors left in the city.
Very few. Yeah, very few. They don't have direct access to pharmacy, so they have to drive all the way to Kramatorsk or Konstantinivka, right, which is a ways away, and a lot of people don't have cars. A lot of these people just had bicycles, and so and then the transportation has decreased because of the risk. So yeah, it's just a lot harder. I mean, they get by, they figure it out, but it's yeah. And then they're limited by what they can afford to pay for too. So
right. And I remember you were also telling about like the times when you had to evacuate them, right? Because it was becoming dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, with the fall of Bakhmut, which was December of last year, I could see just that Avdiivka and Bakhmut were north and south of us. If the Russians moved any further, they would cut us off, because the main roads go north-south, the most important highways, the ones that the military uses to support its troops and commerce, everything, right? So I knew that if the Russians got that highway, they would be able to take the east. They would be able to take all of the southeast of Ukraine, because there's nothing. Once you take that highway, there's nothing between that highway and the Dnieper or whatever. And so, and I knew it's like, the Russians are going to do that. I don't know why people aren't paying attention, but and the defensive lines were not there. I would drive all the time across them, and they weren't built yet. They were way behind in terms of building the proper defenses. So I was really concerned that Toretsk was going to ultimately get encircled. And I'm this foreigner, I'm this American. I mean, even though the people I work, that I was helping trust me, and we had a great relationship. When I would talk about, I think the military is at risk here, I think you need to start thinking about evacuations, I think there's a threat, they would say, well, the Army's been there since 2022. We feel pretty good about it. God, many of them were part of, they were connected by their ties to the church. The pastor was involved. And so they had this faith that everything was going to be okay. I kept working on that through a lot of times when I was away from them, because we could correspond more readily by using tools online, so I could use translation tools and things and really have a deeper conversation. And I was trying to share with them the impressions and why I had this view and so forth. And then I thought, I know that the big unknown for them is, if they do evacuate, where do they go? Because I had already heard this. I said, well, maybe, what I'll do is bring the people involved in evacuation that would help them to Toretsk and have them explain it, because I'm just this foreigner. They're like, yeah, you're a great guy, but you don't know what you're talking about. And I respect that. I mean, that's perfectly acceptable. And so I started bringing those people to Toretsk, and we had these long conversations. These are people that had evacuated Bakhmut. They'd been involved in Avdiivka. They'd been involved in all the big evacuations, right? And they knew they'd been through the same routine. They could say, listen, when we were in Avdiivka, people our Bakhmut, they waited and waited like you waited, and guess what? They got killed. So it's people that could be really frank with them about, here are the consequences, here's what it looks like, and here's why you are possibly in the same circumstances. And I just wanted them to share with all the people they fed that there was a threat, they should start thinking about it, and they should start organizing their things, because we're not going to relocate their entire home if things fall apart. We can help them with that now, and we'd be happy to, but we can't be thinking about that when things get really bad, right? And so we just wanted them to have a couple of bags of things that, like, the most important things that they needed if they couldn't bring the rest of their things, right? So I just get them to think about that, right? And so we had, again, 3 days before that Frontline broke, we had a meeting. My partner, Philip, who's Russian English, knew exactly what I was trying to accomplish, so he could speak on my behalf, right? And so it was really, we're like connected, like Siamese twins, It was really great, because he really understood what I was trying to affect, and he had come with this other group of people that were involved, in evacuations. I ended up with vertigo, so I had to go lay down somewhere. Anyways, they had this long conversation, and at the end of it, they said, we'll think about it. And 3 days later, the Russians broke through the line, and 3 days later, that town was being torn apart by artillery, glide bombs, everything. And there wasn't time. We went in initially, and evacuated a couple people with more of their belongings, but then I almost got hit by a shell leaving town. And so we decided, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're going to really limit what we carry. And then it just got escalated so fast. It went from, the line's breaking to the whole town was being bombed. I mean, we had just stuff coming down all around us. And we evacuated all of the people that I work with. And the first day we evacuated 60 people. We had 4 vans. It was just us initially because the word hadn't gotten out that the line had broken. So it was just who was close, who was local, who knew the people there, right? And in evacuations, rarely did the people evacuating know the people that lived there. I was one of those rare people who knew the town, knew the people, so I could help organize it. And that too is something we're trying to replicate, that model, by inserting people to get to know villages so that we have more of that leadership coming from the village itself to help bring people out. But anyhow, then this started June 19th was when things went to pieces. And we were evacuating people, doing, 3 runs a day. You go up from where it was safe in Konstantinivka, and you go up a hill leading up to Toretsk, and you go through. We put our armor on and everything about 5 miles out of town, which is the last checkpoint with the military, and they'll tell you. At that point, we knew the soldiers there. They would say, "Here's what's going on right now that we understand in the city." So you knew where the Russians were or weren't, where they had lined up their artillery and mortar fire, so you could get a sense of where it's safe, where it's not. And then we'd circle up our team. We knew who we were evacuating, where they were located. It's really hard. You don't have street signs, right, or addresses. A lot of the signs have been de-Russified, right? So all the Russian names are no longer on the street signs. They're now Ukrainian, but people still speak of them as Russian, and they're all okay. So the directions we would have is my house is just behind the church that's in the south of town, like down the dirt road. Right? Oh my God. Oh yeah, right? I mean, that's what we had. Yeah. And the way they got in touch with us is, so there were QR codes on all that little posters with QR codes saying, call this number to be evacuated, right? So we had a central, there's this one NGO Ukrainian group that it's sort of like the dispatchers, right? So they get the calls and then they pass it on, or they called me. A lot of the calls came directly to me. And then I would organize people to go do evacuations. And then you're just, and a lot of times you'd be knocking on other houses. Where's this place? Where's this place? So you spent a lot of your time just trying to find them, right? And those were people that wanted to be evacuated. You still had people that still were holding out, that didn't want to be evacuated. Or you had people that said they did, and when you get there, they changed their minds, or they were drunk, and they weren't, or they lost their cat, and they weren't going to leave until you found their cat. We're looking for a cat. Lost our cat. I know. Shh, leave me alone, you silly dog.
I think we want to step away because we are scaring it.
Oh, okay. Stay away. Yeah. The cat's up on a ledge, scared.
Don't go too close and scare them.
Don't scare the cat, okay? So it was, and then if that failed, or if one of our teammates, our vans, got in trouble, it was where do we then meet up, right? So it was really organizing so that nobody got left behind, right? And we knew there was only so much time that we'd allow for before we'd go back and see if that person was okay, because we didn't really have a sense of the safety of everybody, right? We had handheld radios, but there's jamming and so forth going on. So it wasn't that reliable. So yeah. And we got them out.
Oh my.
And we got, it got all the way up to 80 to 100 people a day.
Did you say with milk?
Sure, that would be nice if they had, yeah. Look at this. He made it. He made it. He made it. He made it out. Oh, now he has all these people around. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, with 3 vans. We had a van. I mean, there were people wandering in the street. We just packed people in. We just scream out, evacuate, 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 evacuate. And we'd get them in the car, and whoever would want to go. We had, a small van. We had like 15 people once. just crammed in there with whatever they had. And that's how I met Sveta, who runs the principal shelter, right? So it was after that everything got destroyed. Our kitchens were gone. It was like, okay, now what do we do? Okay, now we support the people that are helping these evacuees. So that's how I met Sveta, who was from Bakhmut. She organized the evacuation in Bakhmut and all the sort of points of invincibility to bring people together. She created these points where people would come to because they could connect with their cell phones and so forth. And that way it was easy to get them out because they would all be drawn like moths to the light, right? So it was a way that they could bring people together, have enough to sort of support them for a very short period of time and then get them out with the army or whoever else was evacuating. So she had set up this shelter that we were taking these evacuees to. And it was an old elementary school that had been converted. So it has beds for 210 people. And a kitchen because the kids used to get lunches there. And so I met Svetlana, and said, "What do you need? Looks like you're going to be busy." and that's now we've been involved in evacuation, supporting evacuation, so the fuel, maintenance, and so forth for the cars, right? And supporting the shelter, the food, clothing. Whatever they need, and then now we're working on relocation service to relocate people to more permanent housing. So,
yeah. Tell about it. Like, how would it look like?
We're actually doing a pilot this weekend because we want to show proof of concept because we want to do something to demonstrate that it works and be able to scale it so that we can get support. What the problem we're trying to solve for is. Right now, the government has an evacuation program. It's a one size fits all. They put you on a train, and the oblast, those 18 provinces, states of Ukraine, it's sort of like a rotation. It shifts. Like for this month, it's going to be, it's going to be out near Lviv. Next month, it's going to be in the northwest. So it moves, and Ukraine provides the transportation. It used to be Pokrovsk, but Pokrovsk is blown up, right? So they moved it. I can't remember where it's been moved to, but there's a train there. They put you on a train. They take you to that oblast. They give you X amount of money, and somewhere in that oblast are these are places that they've designated as shelter, right? That's it. And then you get your monthly check. But you have to go to an administrative center to get the check. That doesn't get sent to you. So you have to have a connection with the Oblast Administration Center where we have put our kitchen in, right? That's one of the main reasons we did, right? Because all the IDP had to come there to begin with. So that way they'd discover us. So that's one service. We don't think it works very well because so many of those people end up in places where they can't find jobs. The shelter that they have is inadequate. Ultimately no one's responsible for that, ultimately the disposition, the welfare of that person, right? And they've been ripped out of their homes. There's 7 million of them in Ukraine. And when the war ends, our concern is that nobody's going to care. Ukraine's economy is, if it weren't for the support it's getting, it's running at a huge deficit right now. So the economy is going to be in ruins when the war is over. It's not going to have the money to be able to rebuild the towns that have been reduced to rubble in the east. So what's going to happen to these people? And so we believe that if we can at least get them to a place where they can find work and become independent, that's one less sort of weight on the government and on the country in terms of recovery. So we're really looking for ways to get these people to independence. And so the process is, first we're looking for people that, we do a means test. So we're trying to determine, could these people otherwise do things on their own? Do they have friends or family elsewhere in Ukraine? Could they pay for for moving their things? If they could, then we're not there to help them. We're there to help the people that don't. And those are largely the people that I was working with in Toretsk. Most of those people didn't have the means, right? They qualified. And so that's why we're doing this. I've lived with this. I've watched it, right? And I'm still in touch with those people. They're spread out all over, right? And they're suffering. I mean, I have regular correspondence on WhatsApp with so many people that I worked with, and they're really struggling. I mean, some of them stayed for that extra month, even though it was really dangerous, because their husband was working to get that last check from the mine that he was working in, right? So anyways, we do a means test to determine whether they're suitable for what we're doing. And then we load up their goods. We bring them to a warehouse in Kramatorsk. We have a truck that can carry probably the belongings for about 4 or 5 families. So we bring them to the shelter. We store their goods. We let them have a couple of days to kind of recover from the trauma of being displaced and moved. And then we take that truck and try to do the most efficient route and do the circle to dropping them off in the locations. And the challenge for us right now is finding, adequate locations. And because of my work in Chernivtsi, I have plenty of contacts there. And we also have a refugee camp that the Germans built that we have partnered with, where we have a kitchen. So we have another kitchen there as well. And so I think we have the ability to find those permanent positions. And also it's a good economy and they can find work. And we know that. So, and we've done that. We've done that with the people that were displaced in the beginning of the war. Those people are now functioning, functioning in the city. Many of them are, not all, but many of them are, because the load on our kitchen started to diminish because those people got jobs. So we know it works. So ultimately, I think of it as the whole life cycle of, being involved in their evacuation, providing shelter for those first days, finding a place for them to live, and then ultimately bringing them and their belongings to that place. That's the goal. The challenge, as you might imagine, always in these things is while you're doing this is sustaining engagement with the world and getting adequate resources to support it. Because the large NGOs think of everything fitting into their box in terms of how they think of the world, and they really are not equipped to deal with the nuances of what it really takes. So they flood a crisis with what they think of as the solution, which may be useful in the first days, but ultimately over the long haul isn't. And I always, if I took you with me across the eastern part of Ukraine, everywhere there's a kitchen or aid, there's a closet, not a closet, a whole room full of boxes and boxes of rice, boxes and boxes of pasta, all these sorts of things that aren't what they need.
Okay.
Right? And the NGOs just get, they measure just how much they delivered, not how ultimately, the outcome. Right? They don't measure that it went into a meal and was served to somebody. They just measure, I delivered X tons of this kind of food to this place that had this number of people. And we've done this formula. This ends up, providing provisions for whatever, but without really understanding the local circumstances and the ability to even cook things, right? So so we're kind of that, we're filling those gaps and hoping to come up with solutions that ultimately can scale. That where you can say that's a solution that's worth investing in. Yeah, so that's what we do.
Yeah, that's just amazing. All this flexibility that you have, like all these like completely different tasks that you were doing for those people.
Yeah, but you're close to them. You're close to them, and over time you build relations across the country. All the money that we raise, we spend in Ukraine. So we're, sort of a collateral effect is we're helping the local economy. I buy from the farmers. I buy the flour from the mill. That I watch the farmers bring their grain in horse-drawn big carriages, and get to watch them grind this big stone. They grind it and they put it in these 50-kilo bags, and I go off with a ton of flour, and that money is invested, in those people's livelihoods. So through that, you get to know these people, right? And those pastors that, are our network, they know because they've been doing it for years, right? Looking after homeless and what have you. So if you're curious, if you just keep asking questions, you keep meeting people, you find the people to help you. That's actually the easy part in Ukraine. It really is. Ukraine's a whole country of volunteers. I mean, everybody has a day job and then they're volunteers, right? In some fashion. Those that stayed, right? And some that have left as well are, like yourself, you're not even Ukrainian, but look at you, right? I mean, there are those people too.
I just feel so bad about it. Yeah, I just can't ignore it.
Yeah, I know, right? You can't, right? Thank God there are enough of us that can't ignore it, right? We're just lucky that maybe we were wired that way, as kids. But yeah, it's so getting those things done is not that difficult. The hardest part is keeping engagement here in the U.S. and elsewhere. We have supporters from around Europe. I mean, I have a volunteer coming in from Macedonia, I have a volunteer coming from England, and I have a volunteer coming from Wisconsin.
Wow.
That's going to join me, right? For different reasons, right? So we have volunteers, mostly from Europe, not a lot of Americans. I've not seen any Americans out of the front. But keeping, that connection alive and keeping, trying to provide something compelling enough on a regular basis to sustain those commitments, those donations, those contributions. And I think to get to that, you need people to actually have almost an experience that is firsthand experience with the people, right? So it's like, that's what got me engaged like I am. So how can I get as close to that as possible, right? And we've had Zoom sessions from the front with the kitchen, talking to people here in Seattle, right? We've done.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah. So I try to create ways in which people start to see them as like their neighbors, right? As just someone that could be down the street. Because I'm convinced if you have that connection, you're going to support people. You're not going to let them down, right? And if you can create that, and that's, as I've talked to you about, the hardest part here is just having a group here, right, that you work with that can help create that, right? That sort of constant connection so that people feel like these are people they care about. Not, I wrote a check, to such and such NGO. Okay, I've done my part, right?
Oh yeah, of
I
course.
want them hooked.
No, 100%. Like I also I have friends in Ukraine who do donation, fundraising campaigns. And the same thing. It's I think people are much more willing to donate when they have some personal attachment. Connection. Yeah. And tell us a little bit of how someone can help you. Someone in the US, for instance, I know you do fundraising, right? Maybe former expats can help somehow, and someone in Ukraine.
Yeah. So wow, that's a So I'll break it down to really simple terms. So our costs of supporting that shelter. Because we're buying the local economy to feed those 200 people a day, 210 people a day is like $2,000. That's nothing, right? That's one of the 3 shelters out there. So that's really inexpensive. The supporting the evacuations and so forth cost other money. But just to break it down to something simple for people to understand, that's how much it costs. It's not much, right? And then we have, a website, we have podcasts, we have materials that we create to communicate with. We have funding events. I have at least a half dozen, at least a year. I had one in New York, I had one in Washington, D.C., I have another one in D.C. next week, I have one in Florida. So it's helped organizing those. In my mind, for me, the greatest thing is have volunteers from different places that have networks, right? You bring them to Ukraine. So we have volunteers coming constantly, and that's because I want them to have that firsthand, to witness things firsthand. So when they come back and they tell stories, those stories have that sense of being
personal.
Yeah, they're real, right? They're not something that's been created by a marketing department. Those are real firsthand, sharing of an experience. And I want those people we'll bring them, we'll keep them safe. We won't take them places that are dangerous, but they'll participate. There's no work that they can bring or skills that they can bring that we can't get from people in Ukraine. So it's one of these things that anyone that comes to Ukraine should never think that, I'm going to be making this great contribution in terms of my labor, including physicians. Physicians come for a couple of weeks and they don't have long-term impact because they can't be there for follow-up. They can't be there for the complicated things, right? They can maybe patch a wound, or they can do some basic maintenance things, or teach someone. So there's really not much you can do if you just come over for a couple of weeks, right? But what you can do that's huge, 2 things. One, you show that you care and that you're there to support them. And believe me, that you can imagine 2.5 years into a war, the morale in Ukraine is pretty low, and especially with the coming elections and the concern that we may no longer support them. So anything that shows that you're there to support them is huge, especially if you come back again. And then bringing that story back here and sharing it with your network and telling people explaining to them that they need to help. They need help, and it doesn't take much. And the more people we get, the more we can really solve problems. And then sustain those relationships. So, like myself, to be able to keep that connection alive, right? To keep that caring alive. And that's what I'm trying to do, is build that network. And it's growing. We have people in so many places now that have volunteered, which is why I end up having these fundraisers all over the place, right? But it takes work. We're not a huge organization, so I'm a former entrepreneur, so it reminds me so much of the early days of a startup company. So it has a lot of the same characteristics, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to get to that, build awareness. And you're really trying to build awareness, and you're trying to enable people to make that choice, because it takes exposure to something over time, unless it's a personal connection where you know me and trust me and hear these stories and you say, oh, Pete, I want to help. If it's someone outside that circle, then it takes longer, and the further removed they are, the harder it is to get them to support you. So yeah, but it seems to be working. We're still at it. That's so many NGOs have failed. I mean, we look around us, there's so many NGOs that got, way too big too quickly. And then the support evaporated, and they had to shut down. And we always stayed smaller. We only did what we could afford to do. So we may not have had as big an initial impact, but we've been there. So we've had a more sustaining impact with a smaller group of people, but I think it's made a difference.
Yeah, I completely hear what you say. Like, my friend in Lviv also told me that there were so many different volunteer opportunities in the beginning. She herself was weaving clothes for for the army, and then it just disappeared one day. So
the things that have stayed on are a lot of people that are volunteering themselves and just committed in their basement, weaving together camouflage nets or what have you, right? I mean, it still goes on in Ukraine, but it's just not, the outside funding and support just isn't there like it used to be.
Yeah, right. And people in Ukraine, what kind of people are you looking for? Who do you want?
In Ukraine?
Yeah.
So that's a good question. What I'm looking for more than anything are people, so within kind of the scope of what we're doing, people that could help where they live, where they have a network, right? In identifying places for people to be relocated to. That's a big problem. If we had people throughout Ukraine that could help us with that intent of, I want to relocate them somewhere where they actually can, find work and become independent, right? And we're not talking great volumes. I mean, if we had a couple dozen people do that, we could solve for a lot of problems, right? In terms of, because we expect, so in the shelter, 210 people, they stay for 4 days. I think when things really get bad here in the next month or so, that shelter is going to be full all the time. So that's 210 times maybe 6 to 8 times a month, right? Of people flowing through. So that's a lot of people, that's a couple thousand people. So it's really, and then not all of them need to be using our service, right? So many of them will have other, a lot of them have means. So if we means test those people, maybe, 10% of them need to be relocated. So that's, now we're starting to be in numbers that are manageable, like 100 or less, right? So that's what we're thinking is that's, sort of where we want to be, is to be able to relocate people with the service I described, where we would do probably 3 trips a month, 4 trips a month. And then, eventually, and that would be 4 or 5 families. So you're sort of initially just using that resource of the truck and the things that we coordinate, and then eventually get to the point where you can do more volume. So we're trying to get that started with what we see as the surge in evacuees, and then, ultimately expanding in terms of where we can put them. So it's just people that are willing to volunteer to help find places across Ukraine. And again, it's not a lot of places, with their network. You have a half dozen, 6 places that you think people could move to where they could actually be housed and find work, right? Are you in a community where there's those kinds of jobs available, not some small rural town that's everybody's subsistence living. So it means, places like Lviv or Kyiv or Chernivtsi or, any of the sort of more Western, larger cities and towns, right? So yeah, that's really important. Then I'm looking for partners that are dealing with families, with children, that can help with, if we relocate, what can we connect them to? So in the places like in Chernivtsi,
families to become a foster family, right, for those orphans?
Well, so there's probably won't be orphans, but there are women that have lost their husbands, people with trauma, children with illness. So there's, it's just having a way. So in Chernivtsi, there's this couple that have this really wonderful facility that they've developed to address those things. And that's another reason why I'm focusing there, because I know it. But it's that kind of hub that can support those kinds of people, which are generally, we're going to see a lot of those kinds of families because the husband's dead. The wife stayed in the town with the children hiding, and doesn't have any way of supporting herself, right, when she moves. So it's those kind of services. So first finding them a place, but then also making sure that where we relocate them to, especially as well if they're people that have some sort of disability or disease. If they were a volunteer, we have this conversation with them to say, these are the kind of people we have. Here's the kind of location. Here are the sort of services that we need to have. Do you think that there's that in your town or your city, right?
Right.
Yeah, those, and a lot of times, the people that usually know these things often are faith-based. People that are connected to a church often know because the church has been doing this with homeless people and other people that were destitute for other reasons. Anyone who's involved in the equivalent of sort of the social service world that has access to that. I know well the woman who runs all of what are sort of the social services within the Chernivtsi Oblast. And so having that connection, trying to understand how that works and where those services and relocation sites are. I would say, when the Russians broke through the line, initially we were calling out for volunteers everywhere, but that's dangerous because these are people that, a lot of people came that didn't have training. We had some people get killed. I don't try to encourage that, although we really could have used people to help. I just, it's, the hard part is that there's only so much you can learn quickly in situations like that. And it got really dangerous. So those are the kind of things we don't need help with, although they need more people helping with it generally. Getting in touch with us through our website.
Yeah.
There's for volunteers outside the U.S. There's information, and then you just fill out the form if you're interested, and we'll respond. We're always going to respond to that, and we have a conversation to see how you could help. Here in the U.S., here back in the States, where I am, and where all of the marketing and communication work is done, I can use help here as well, because I do most of all of the accounting, the website. We do some podcasts in Romania that we record. We have a podcast studio there, so we do some of that there, and then a lot of the correspondence here, and then of course the fundraising.
Which language is it in?
It's both English and Romanian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do both. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll definitely leave all the your contacts, and I'm personally happy to connect.
Yeah.
Whoever is interested to help.
And we never say no, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the magic is you never know, right? Resume. I've never believed in resumes. I've grown companies and hired, but I throw the resume away. I just look at it and say, okay, yeah, they've probably got some of the skills I need, but I want to meet them, right? I want to know them because, we want people that we can trust, that are accountable, right?
Yeah.
The challenge with volunteers, and this is what anyone, if you hang out with those of us out in the front, we all grumble about, is volunteers are more trouble than they're worth, right? No, I don't mean it, but they're a lot of work sometimes, right? And you're in a situation where you don't have time. So they have to be pretty well self-managed, and you point them to something that needs doing and it gets done. And if it's something they don't know how to do, then you help them, you train them to do it, right? But it's not for everybody. It's especially the closer you get to the front. So you really, to be a volunteer, you really have to believe that you have to think, I'm willing to do this work as if it were a job anywhere, right? Whether I was getting paid or not, it has nothing to do with it. This is work that needs doing. And we love to have you on board. We have a great group of people that have been with us forever. We'd love to have people. We'd love to have them. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you said about this training that is definitely necessary to work near the front line.
Yeah, we really don't take people out there.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, when things we got overwhelmed when the Russians broke through the front line. Absolutely. Yeah, I walked everybody through that because there wasn't time to make sure that they understood largely how to deal with combat trauma, which is a little different than how you address sort of the protocols of what you do first. In a battlefield injury, bleeding is the most important thing. Is stopping the bleeding, and that ordinarily in a car accident or things that I had when I was a fireman, it was a different sort of order, and you weren't being shot at while you were trying to help someone. Right, and so it's a little different in terms of how you approach trauma and stopping bleeding. The use of tourniquets. There are a whole different aspects to it. So just it's called MARCH, massive hemorrhaging, basically an airway, respiratory, making sure they're breathing, cardiac, and then H is hypothermia, right? So you want to make sure people don't lose heat, because if you lose blood, you lose heat and you die. And so it's really getting people comfortable with all of those things and that they can perform them.
Yeah.
And be in a situation where the reason that they're doing this is because somebody got hit by, shrapnel or got shot, right? So they're in a situation that already is scary, right?
Yeah.
So those are things that you can't really train for. And we had to because they were the only people there, right? And luckily, for the most part, there was one exception. For the most part, they were pretty good. We came out without a scratch.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. No, thanks a lot about this talk. And maybe there is something we haven't talked about. Like, for instance, you told me the story when you took your son to Kyiv, right, to play music.
No, I did. Yeah. So my oldest just graduated university, and he's a jazz musician, but he also studied environmental science and computer science. He wants to take time off, and he wants to play music for a year or what have you. And he was really interested in what was going on in Ukraine. And I said, why don't you come, bring your saxophone? And so this is last summer, a year ago, right? So he was still going to school. And he was really keen. I really wanted him because so much of my life, my younger life, was in the Middle East, and they don't know anything about it. So I thought, I'm not going to have my life be more of a mystery with my children. I want them to know my life, right? And so he came, and when I set up, I tried to organize different opportunities for him to play. There's this top jazz musician in Romania, like the best. And one of the people I work with knew him, and so we tried to make that happen. It didn't happen. We were going to go out to the front, but my driver's wife was in the hospital, so we didn't go there. But I know a Brazilian who's been in Kyiv for 10 years, and he has a jazz club. And so that's where we're going to go. And so we went to Kyiv, and Mauricio's jazz club is right up by it's right up where you always see Zelensky walking with guests, where they have that line of photos of all the soldiers people who have died fighting in the war, right? And he walks down that street. It's like half a block away from that street.
What's the name of the club?
It's I need to ask me. It's called
We'll add it.
I have to, because Mauricio will be thrilled if people know his club. They'll know it if they live in Kyiv. They'll know his club, absolutely, because it has music. But the basement, which is also the neighborhood bomb shelter, is a jazz club, and it's got beautiful brick, high domed ceilings, and it's a really cool club. And I've known him since the war started. Just the people you meet, right? And I always stay in that neighborhood when I'm there. So yeah, we went out, got to hang out with musicians and for a couple of days. And he said to me, and we'd been traveling through Ukraine before then, right? And, the food's fabulous, the people are great, and, it's very inexpensive. And he said, Dad, I could live here. And, air raid sirens are, in the background are going all the time. But he got accustomed to it because he knew me. And I said, don't worry, yes, we do have drones, but it's a big city. The chances of us being hit by a drone are pretty small. Mm-hmm. Don't worry. People that are living here have been living here unscathed. Yes, every so often tragedy happens, but you'll be fine. So he got familiar with it. And the main thing I wanted for him was to see this is what war is. This is something we just don't want to have in the world, right? And I wanted him to have that firsthand experience and to see the people that were struggling and suffering, but still, were on their feet and getting up every day and making the best of it. I want him to see what that really looks like. So that, I thought it was a really important experience. And it was, for me, it was just wonderful. Absolutely loved it. And he's coming back. And this time he's going to play. So yeah, he's coming back with a friend who's a drummer that's in one of his bands. Yeah. So he's coming back in February. Yeah. Which is, will be the middle of, I don't know, we'll see. Again, the war, you never know what's going on then. So, but that's the plan. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah.
It was so cool. I can't tell you. And I've lived all over the world and done so many things. And it was like, I said, this is your trip. Just you decide, I'll just follow. Like, just do it as if you were alone. Because I just wanted him to have discoveries on his own, like wherever you want to go. Because I didn't know where to go when I came here, just do that. So I was trying to just take the back seat. Because I wanted him to have that kind of almost I did it alone experience. And next time I'm going to cut him loose, take him to Kyiv and leave him there and let him figure it out, which he'll be fine with.
And how much time have you spent there during the war?
I've done 9 trips, and most trips are at least 2 months. So I've been there at least 18 months since the war started. The war's been going for 2 years and 270 some odd days. So I've been there for,
more than half
of the war. Yeah. And I've been there for every chapter. Like I think of it in terms of what was going on then. It's when drones first started. I got a drone landed 100 yards from me in Kyiv, one of those big Shahid drones, right? By the train station in the morning. I rember that day. That was like when drones started, right? And then I remember when the Kramatorsk, when the Kharkiv's energy system got shut down. It's like you have these different periods, like when the offensive happened, right? I think of them as each of these like chapters. When we closed our kitchen because, one of our kitchens, because the people were independent, they didn't need our kitchen anymore. When I went to Toretsk, right? It's like, how many more chapters are there going to be, right? So I think of it in those terms. And I just go home. The reason I go is to identify the next project and then go home to go out and raise money for it. That's the reason I go. And because they're my friends. And I just want them to know I'm still here, trying to help them. Yeah.
And I remember you were telling about communication gaps, right, as well. Like you can communicate when there is internet connection and like translator and such.
Yeah. So, they're two, it's a blessing and a curse. Wherever the internet exists, and you have access to AI and translation tools, it's amazing. I've been traveling and working around the world for my entire life, for almost 70 years, right? And what I'm able to do in Ukraine, I could never have done 10 years ago, because I can sit down, and I've mentioned this, my friend Olga Boss, who speaks Russian. She doesn't speak any English, and she's not that good with Ukrainian. So we'll have a conversation in the coffee shop. I'll put my phone down, turn split level, Google Translate, and it's capturing us real time, right? It differentiates between the two languages. It's laying out in front of us the text, and not only do I know what she's saying, but I have a transcript of the conversation. So when it's over, I go home because I want to make sure we both understood each other. I write up my notes, I send it to her, and she says, "Yep, that's what I said." I said, "Okay, great." And we have real conversations. They're not like the tree is blue or the sky is blue, the tree is green, right? Do you have kids? we're talking about getting work done, right? That works in the coffee shop in Toretsk, right? Where we have fairly reliable internet. We have Starlinks out in our kitchens, and within the realm of our kitchens, we had the same service levels, right? And I could do the same. But as things deteriorated, and jamming was going on, and power, our when things happened where we lost that connection, or when I was away from that, out in the bushes trying to talk to some evacuee that we were trying to get to race across the field to go into the basement to hide from the drones, I couldn't have that conversation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, when things really got really challenging, it was really hard. Or when you're standing in front of someone's home and shelling is dropping all around you and you're trying to convince them that they have to go, and that you're going to leave if they don't because your life's at risk. And you want to do that in a way that's forceful, but also respectful, right? Because they're going through this incredibly traumatic experience, and you can't just pick someone up and throw them in your van, right?
Yeah.
You don't have that right. So it's you're with whatever capabilities you have, trying to convince someone to make the right choice to save their lives. Yeah. So that's the hardest part. That was for me was the hardest part. That and people who were killed or injured because they didn't, early in the war, especially because it was more chaotic early in the war. Nobody knew what they were doing in the whole country. It was, for all of us, it was a raw, new experience. So we were all running on instinct. At least now, we've all had a shared experience, so we have a better understanding of, possibly how to react and what to do. So, yeah. But thank God for the tools, because I couldn't have done anywhere near what I've been able to accomplish out there, or learn what I've learned, or build the relationships that I have, the friends that I have there. So, yeah, it's amazing. It really is.
It is.
Yeah, so that's a vote for AI. I mean, like any technology, they're downsized, but man, again, as we were talking earlier with your husband, is if we had a tool that, in real time, you could talk to people no matter where they came from, whatever language they spoke, imagine what we could do. Right?
Yeah, and if it was on like a device
that you could carry with you and didn't have to be connected to the internet, yeah, it would be remarkable. People would get out of their shells. They'd no longer be kind of, because people, when you're speaking in a language that it's not your first language, you're always, feeling a little embarrassed because you're not, and you're afraid to even try it because you don't, so there's all these sort of things, psychological barriers to even using a language to begin with.
Of course.
And then if you had that just completely disappear and suddenly you're having a lucid sort of, completely conversant connection with someone from a completely different world, you'd realize they're just the same as you. They have the same issues, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, that's
you go,
100% true.
Yeah, for the most part. And then the other stuff entertains you because you go, oh, no kidding, you do that? Whoa, that's weird. Yeah, and you end up creating connections. Yeah.
I see. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Natalia, thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you. Yeah, and let's just hope more people decide to keep helping. Yeah. I think it's in my lifetime, it's the most important period ever, especially these next few months. So I think this is the most meaningful period in my life, my 70 years here. So it's all really important for all of us to, I think, recognize that and do what we can to bring peace back to that part of the world, and return people to their lives.
Yeah, that's very much true. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, thanks you guys.
Yeah, you'll know where to write. Thank you. Bye everyone.